So we're going to see if this is working. I've heard. We're going to switch to this mode and actually see myself. Oh, wait, no, there's a camera there, but it's not moving. That's neat. That's a cool trick. That's a great deer in the headlights look for me, though. I appreciate that, you know? This is going to make a giant me. I apologize in advance. Die, I'm huge. Ugh. Everybody loves a giant mark. I plug that back in. Do I get a second camera choice? I'd like an additional camera choice. There we go. Hi. This is that camera too. Cool. All right. Things are still kind of crashed, so I'm gonna try to put the pieces back together here. There's that. Look, it's a lore link. Okay. Yes. In a time period, basically, in a time period when the stream is down, basically, things have gone from bad to worse for 20 and their desire to avoid getting hooked into buying things. Okay. All right. We'll keep going and see how long this lasts, and hopefully it doesn't explode things. Let's see. I was trying to think about what we were talking about before. I think what I was talking about before I disappeared was I was saying that at conventions, dice dealers have figured out the jeweler trick of good lighting and basically in jewelry cases for displaying their dice, which makes them very dangerous and basically can get very expensive. The spell dice, for example, has some really nice booths. Let's see here. Okay, so in any case, talking about Daggerheart still. So Daggerheart, basically, like we were talking about, basically it kind of falls into it very much is it wants to be a little bit more narrative. And so this is basically when you're building a campaign out in this, you're going to be looking at, you're listening to your players, you're listening to their basically to their conversations, to the stories they're trying to build, and they're very much basically encouraging you to build on what your players are giving you, as opposed to narratively railroading them down a single path. And so a lot of what that means is it's going to be basically, especially when you have a system like the hope and fear system, which is going to add a lot of complications, things like that. They're also encouraging you to ask your players to add to the descriptions. Like if your player character, for example, is from the town that you're in, having them describe the marketplace. Or if they're a character who's basically part of a thieves guild and they end up in a thieves guild, maybe not necessarily theirs, but you can hand it over to them to be like, what in your mind is a thieves guild going to look like? Because their character essentially, what they think their character should experiences should be. You and that player character should be working together to build those experiences out together. So from a lore link, basically from a lore link example, a lot of what that means is Daggerheart playtest. Yeah, Fuse Guild is definitely finding some other guys. I mean, yeah, basically, and it's one of those where it's like, basically what type of individuals, describe the lighting, describe the circumstance. It's not something which is necessarily you need to set in stone as basically as the GM, that you need to sit down and be like, this is the way the situation looks. This is the way the Thieves Guild is set up. This is the way this castle is set up. This is the way this inn is set up. This is the way this market is set up. They want you to have, yes, there's a market. Yes, there's a village. Yes, there's a castle. Yes, there's a king. Basically, yes, there is an evil lord who's scheming, etc., etc. Yes, there's a thieves guild your characters might get pulled into to pull off some task for basically for the organization, but handing some of that narrative control back to your players and working with them to build things out is more what they're kind of trying to encourage with Daggerheart. And that's what the hopes and fears system. It's not meant to be a yes and basically the GM is the only one who makes who states what that and or but or whatever it is. It is meant to be, okay, so you just failed, you succeeded but with a complication, and the example they give is a character charging across a narrow bridge to basically like a narrow plank we set up between two buildings to get to an enemy wizard who's throwing spells at their friends. Okay, they succeed, but they succeed with hope to them. Maybe they wanted that path back, and so attempting to reconnect. I might be dead. At least that's a cool frame for me to be dead on. This is me expositing. Wow. And I'm back? My camera's not back. Oh, yeah, but basically the closed captioning is picking up. I have no drop frames. I'm at 629. I've been streaming for 8 minutes. My camera, however, is gone. Hi. It says it's still on, but it's clearly not. Cool. I'm going to mute part of my thing here. I'm still talking, though. Yes, basically, we have not bribed the... we have not laid enough. Basically, the tech support spirits are being gremlins. Well, let's see here. Can I get that camera to work? Or at least not have that anymore? I'm beginning to wonder if it is... Is it my bridge? Or my dock? Because nothing else is dropping out. Just this desktop computer. Well, in any case, we'll keep talking. You'll just have to deal with my face not being here for a little bit. Imagine me gesturing and gesticulating and making points and otherwise commenting on the general, basically making hand gestures. In any case, so basically that the narrative decisions that they're going with in basically in Daggerheart is basically they're leading you to try to have this more of an open conversation with your players over what's going on in the storyline, as opposed to D&D is a little bit more basically D&D, the roles are the end arbiter of the situation. While there's some rules, basically while there's some rule space for deciding what powers work or things like that you can mess with, the rules are fairly straightforward in terms of this is success, this is a failure, this is what your spells do. End of the conversation. Daggerheart wants to be more of, is following in a more modern trend of more open RPGs, more narratively open RPGs, as it were. So what does that mean for a GM is that you're wanting your planning, to be a little bit more open. You want your planning to be basically you're going to be building more events. You're going to have locations, but it kind of plays into Lore Link's style a little bit, basically relatively well, because you're not going to put a ton of information into any of these things. You're going to be creating snippets of things. You're going to be creating basically, like for example, in the Sablewood Messengers, they have basically the most of the adventure, basically most of the book that they have given you, um, three-quarters of that is the player content, discussing the players, teaching the games, and things like that. And then the last quarter is the brief overview, kind of basically of what they want you to adventure, giving you stats on some of the monsters, because from that standpoint, it's still kind of crunchy. It is not a completely narrative system. It is very much, you can still see that they're still sticking to a more basically kind of like the Modifius 2D20 system, where you're still doing a decent amount of rolling. Like, there's still a decent bit of, okay, you're rolling these dice, you're adding these things in, you're crunching these numbers, and basically the GM is calling for these rolls, here are the stats, here's how damage and armor works, and you have all of those things which are still in there. So, and they even say, basically, it's like, this is less crunchy than a full, basically, than somebody like playing D&D, but probably more crunchy than someone who's coming from Fate, and things like that, would expect. There's basically, there's a little bit of rolling and then math afterwards, because, like, for example, combat is, basically combat is freeform from the standpoint of the GM just puts a little action tracker in the center of the table, and then whenever somebody wants to go, they just put a token onto the mat, and they take their turn. Basically, there is no initiative, there's no rolling, there's nothing like that. You put your tokens on there, and the GM removes tokens from it to take actions for their enemies whenever they want as well. So, and it's meant to be you and the players figure out what that balance of narrative is between you. And basically you go through all of it. That's how that's determined. Basically, GM takes 2 tokens off to do fear effects and things like that. But it's still crunchier for once you actually get into an action. It's like, okay, I want to take an action. So I'm going to roll I'm going to determine the trait. Then I'm going to determine if it's advantage or disadvantage. Then I'm going to determine if any of my experiences add to that. Then once I get all those bonuses down, they're like, okay, use some of your tokens or something to remember what that number is. Roll your 2d12. Add those two numbers together. Add your bonuses or negatives in. Add your advantages or disadvantages in. To get that final number. Determine if that final number passes, basically succeeds or fails. Now check to see if you have hope or fear, because you see which die is higher. Is it a success or failure of hope, or a success or failure with fear? Or is it a critical success if they show the same number? Okay, cool. Now you've determined that action happens. If that action was an attack, now you go to roll the damage. The damage is the number of, basically you look up your weapon. Your weapon has a dice damage on it. There's a long list of weapons. Basically, you look at it and you're like, okay, this is a long sword, so it's a d10 plus 3. I have damage proficiency of 2, which means I roll 2 of my weapon die, so it is 2d10 plus 6. And that determines how much damage I do. But damage is not hit point damage. Basically, that is just damage. Then whatever you're hitting looks at their hit point or damage thresholds that say, if I take under this, I don't take any hit point damage. If I take between like, basically it's usually like 1 or 3. If for like a tougher character, 0 and 3, I don't take any hit point damage. If it's between 4 and 8, I take 1 point of hit point damage. If it's between 9 and 18, I take 2 points of damage. And if the GM really wants to be mean, you can have massive damage. So if you take 36 and above, you take 4 hit points of damage. And basically, and at that point, you determine whether or not you wanted to use your armor. If you're using your armor, you subtract your armor, you check a box of your armor value off, and that will determine whether or not your armor value applies. And then you could use your armor value multiple times to try to reduce the damage to below your hit point thresholds. So, like I was saying, there's a lot of crunch in that one section, basically for that. But then but then all you're doing is basically then it's whoever's turn is next is whoever wants to do the next action and things like that. So there's a little bit of that in there. They have countdown dice similar to Blades in the Dark countdown system, and this song is just not a song. Next, please. Okay, so in any case, so what that means from a lore link perspective is it's just like it started and I'm like any second now this is going to become a calming cinematic song, which is the station I'm playing, and it chose not to. It chose to be the aliens are eating your spaceship. Cool. But in any case, with lore link, it basically you're going to want to set up a little bit of basically bits and pieces of things, ideas, concepts. You're going to want your overall flow inside of lore link. You're going to want to have events that you're going to create that are going to be basically like the conspiracy begins. Can't spell conspiracy. There we go. And you're going to have some details over what those are. And you're going to have like basically like encounter in the village market. Basically, and you're going to have that kind of planned out. You're going to basically build out your creatures and things like that, and you're going to have those set up. You're going to have your creatures. You're going to have your characters, your villains. You're going to have those set up. You're going to link that. You're going to link to those, but you're not going to dump a lot of detail in them. You're going to be spending a lot of your time during your basically. You're going to then basically set them up and kind of build your session out. Basically, you're going to. When you build out your session, you're going to, let's go ahead and, let's see here. Hush is the village in the book. So, you're going to do a lot of things inside your session one. Basically, you're going to have, let's associate that, let's put that event in there. Let's associate that village in here. Let's associate. Basically, we haven't created anything. Basically, like some of the creatures I'm wanting to work with. Like in this case, there is Strix wolves, which are owl wolves. And you're going to have all of those, and you're going to associate all of those, and you're going to kind of mark off where your players get to, and you're going to be doing a lot of, okay, they get to the village and they're going to be adding things in. So like you're going to create a sub location underneath here. Your players are going to be like, oh yeah, my character, there's a blacksmith in this town, and we're going to go talk to the blacksmith, and we're going to work with the blacksmith to repair this, or we've domesticated the Strix wolf, and basically we want to create a crate for it, and basically so we're going to go to the carpenter, and you're wanting to do all of that, and you're going to quickly create those basically carpenter's workshop, and you're going to associate with the village of Hush. And then you're going to take whatever description your players give you, basically like, is there is perched on at a finial, and you're going to save that, and then your players are going to basically build on that. Basically, maybe they're going to introduce. Basically, you're like, oh, now I have to create that that carpenter I talked about, and then you're going to come up with a name for them. And you're going to give a description. Basically, you and the players are going to come up with a description. Yep. Hey, well, yeah, you missed all the fun. By fun, they mean me starting and restopping the stream, and the reason why that box in the corner, which normally have my face in it, currently does not. That's fine. Glad you made it, though. So, that's not how you spell finial, but it's fine. I think it's 2 N's, actually. It's gonna bother me until I'm here, but not here. So basically, and so what you're going to be doing with all that is you're going to be adding all those details and basically capturing notes and things like that, and capturing interactions and things like that, because that's something else that this system really wants to build in at the start. Is that you have relationships with other characters, that you have backstory. A lot of the sheets have questions and things like that that dig deeper into a backstory than necessarily you might do with a basically like Pathfinder and D&D hand you backstories, and they're like, here's your backstory. It is basically, you could choose from this list: soldier, basically tinker, spy, basically goat herder. All of those things are like options in the list, and they give you certain skills and things like that, and they give you a blurb of text which talks about it that you can then build your character off of. A lot of the adventure paths will have specific ones that are built into the adventure path for working with that particular adventure and giving you some plot hooks into that. But this one, because your backstory is what becomes your skills, you've got to take more particular note of your characters, what your characters list as their experiences, because those are what they're going to be tagging when they basically, that's what when you're judging an encounter and you're building an encounter out. You're like, hey, do the players have any ability to track stuff through the woods? You're going to look at your character's experience and be like, oh, this one says that they were a druid of the high hills or a ranger of the deep marshes. Okay, they're probably they could probably tag that. I'm using the tag word because it's very similar to the fate system. They're going to use that and say, hey, I get a +1 to this roll because of that. That's going to make it a little bit easier for them to succeed at those rolls. If they say that they're an assassin of they're an ex-assassin of the Sapphire Hand, oh, okay. Basically, that gives you a backstory hook to basically, they're going to have some bonuses to combat and probably some sneaking stuff and things like that for breaking in, but also it gives you a hook for ex-assassin of the Sapphire Hand. That means something happened where they broke free of the organization. Maybe the organizations get basically set up. They also have starting questions that ask you to basically link to other characters. Basically, they have a more generic kind of just come up with connections. They also have, I believe, I have to double check, I'm flipping through it on here. They also have, for each character, they have, like, basically to get you started, here are your connections. Basically, here are your connections, which are through, basically, of the characters. Pick one character and say that you'd follow them anywhere. Pick one character and say, we get in too much trouble. Pick one character and say, I'm intimidated by you. So it helps you build all of those out, basically get those started. Because basically two things. There's one thing the book says, and one thing that I've heard from another RPG reviewer. Quinn's Quest is the name of it. It's a fun RPG review series. One is talking about you basically, as the GM, be the fan of your player characters. Basically basically be a fan of those characters, basically want them to succeed on their journeys, want them to basically want them to triumph, want them to explore their things, basically want to find out more about them. So be a fan of your characters. And basically Quinn also adds the caveat in, hey, your players should also be fans of the other characters as well. You want to build that up as well, because you want your players to be fans of your other players. You want your players to be interested in each other's stories and things like that, and want them to succeed, even if their characters don't necessarily agree with each other. Basically, their characters may absolutely hate each other in the game, but you want your players to be like, oh, I want to find out more about basically the way that character ticks. I want to find out more about their story. I want to develop that relationship. Basically, I want to turn that antagonism into something that works out. Basically enemies to best friends type situation, where it's like, we can't stand working with each other until we find out that the reason why your character has this quirk is because of this tragic thing, or this thing in their backstory, or these things that they're pursuing them. Or just basically over time you've built the relationship, you've broken down the walls, and then you manage to triumph, and they're finally grudgingly wanting to be part of the group. Like, that's an interesting storyline that helps build out that relationship that isn't necessarily something that the adventure is going to put into play. It's not even not something necessarily that their backstory is going to have, but the player characters are going to bring that to the table, and by being fans of each other's characters, they're going to want to draw them out. And like I was talking about earlier, this kind of narrative system with that action system I talked about earlier, where how combat works is there is no initiative, there is no turn order, there isn't anything that says you should stop taking turns, other than the fact that they want you to be fans of they want your players and you as the GM to be fans of each other, be fans of the characters that are playing in this adventure. You want them to stop and say, hey, looking at this sheet, I can see the fact that player A has taken 3 actions, player B has taken 5 actions, player C has taken 2 actions. Hey, basically, player D has taken none. Hey guys, let's get player D to do something. Let's get player D into this. Let's pass the spotlight on to them. Maybe the character who's taken 7 actions needs to take a step back. Wild Sea, basically, you may remember Wild Sea does something similar to that, in terms of keeping an action log, of basically keeping track of who has the spotlight the most in that game. And as a GM and as the players, you should stop and go, hey, we have all been hogging it a little bit. Let's pass it on to someone who hasn't been. And if you don't care about the other characters, if you don't care about the fact that you don't care about that, basically that small, shy cat creature in the background who's just kind of hanging out back there, and you don't want them to have basically to get more into the story, you're going to miss that. Basically, you're just going to override them, and odds are good they're basically A, the player isn't going to have fun during the game. B, that player is less likely to show up to games. So basically, hey, if you're having problems scheduling because one player's like, I'm busy, they keep scheduling things, they don't show up, etc., it could be because they're not having a good time at your game because you keep running them over. And this system doesn't stop that. Like D&D and Pathfinder and systems like that, very definitely stop and go, no, everybody has to take a turn. Basically, you get one action during this initiative round, and that's all you get, so everybody has to act. When I'm running Toon, when John and I are running Toon, we tend to do a round-the-table approach of making sure that everybody takes an action, because we know it's a pickup game, because we know the fact that it is basically it's a game that has a lot of, basically can be overwhelming because there's a lot going on, because it's Toon, stuff's exploding, walls are falling down, so basically basically characters are dying and getting stood back up. Things are basically things are happening, transforming, and et cetera, all over the place. And it's very easy to, if you just let everybody do their own thing and just take whoever's talking loudest, that you're going to miss some of those people. And it's always great fun at those games when you go around the tables and you're doing a little bit back and forth and letting other people interrupt and things like that. But to see those people at the beginning are like, oh, I came to this because this sounds like really fun and I want to have fun, and taking them from, oh no, basically I have to do a little bit of talking and things like that and I'm not certain, to, oh no, this is fun. I can't wait for my turn to come back around, and I can contribute that. It's great basically kind of pulling those characters basically into the spotlight and watching them expand and grow and have fun. That's kind of the goal. That's why we GM. Yeah, Feng Shui 2 is the same thing in terms of it's very much you have to basically, there's a lot of those chaotic in professional games. You have to be you have to be careful of your players, because you can run over people. And basically that system isn't in basically in Daggerheart. I'm gesturing to a PDF to an iPad you cannot see, so you just take my word for it. This is the podcast version of me. But basically this system, it has strictures there to hint at the fact that, hey, awesome. So basically it has the strictures there to hint at that, to be like, hey, you need to do that, but you need to be aware going into it that if you're not ready to, that is your job as a GM in this more narrative-based system, is not only are you keeping track of your monsters and things like that and making sure that things are flowing on your side, you are making sure the story is still flowing. And that's what Lore Link is for, is to take that note quickly of something that happened. The character has added something. Basically friendly forest. Make that note. Basically, capture that. Capture that note. Make sure the fact that you know what it is. That way, when you come back to this later, and you're like, oh right. Basically, like, we're in the Carpenter, like, so the Strixel doesn't make as much sense. But basically he wants to Carpenter. Basically, keeping track of the information. So they come back to this tale and you remember that information, you bring it back to them, you expand that character a little bit more, you give them that backstory. You make note of you make notes on the players themselves of things which are going, goals that they have, and you're keeping those short notes. Basically, you're jotting them off while you're playing, so that when it comes time to plan the next session, you come to the player and you're like, oh right, they're wanting to improve their carpentry skill, or oh right, they're wanting to befriend the Strixwolves. I should put more encounters with them, or give them a reason to work on that, or in case you have those type of encounters, and narratively pass them the ball and let them build with it, let them grow with it, let them take it from there. And it can be a lot of fun, but it's also a little bit more work. It's a little bit more basically planning that you need to put into it as a GM before sessions, between sessions. And you're going to, that work is going to be easier or harder depending on how organized you are. The more disorganized you are, the more ad hoc, more off the cuff that you get. Basically, you're going to have great success during the game, and then week to week you're going to kind of lose some things. You're going to have a little bit of, oh hey, basically the characters aren't growing. Basically, you're not pushing them as much. I run into that problem a lot, especially when I'm running basically adventure paths and things like that, because so much of the work is done for me. It's harder for me to remember, hey, I need to focus on getting the characters and moving the characters as long as well through this adventure to make them come to life, because otherwise, because basically a lot of the pre-made adventures, things like that, they have gaps, they have things like that. They're built to be broad in situation because they want to, basically they can't determine everything that's going to happen during a game, and they're just there to kind of push you in the right direction. So if you're not careful, you're going to miss some of that. Yeah, let's see. So it's 6:25. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to cover. So again, this is Daggerheart. This is the Daggerheart playtest. So a lot of the things I've talked about, basically a lot of the rolling and things like that, could all change over the course of it. Check out the website. They will be updating it regularly as they go through the playtest process. They're still doing a lot of things like they're balancing adversaries and things like that. One thing I didn't mention. One of the weird things is, well, I mentioned the 2d12 system. Players are rolling 2d12, adding the number, and that determines whether or not they succeed or not. Basically, difficulties range from 5 for really easy, 10 for normal, 15. So, again, with an average roll being 13, you're looking at, oh, okay, cool. You're on general, you're succeeding because the bell curve is squarely in that center. Normal difficulty is 10, 13 is going to succeed, so you have a high chance of succeeding at normal difficulty tasks. Cool. But GMs aren't rolling 2d12 most of the time. GMs are rolling d20s. They're back to the d20 system. They're rolling that because they want GMs to be more wild and more flighty and more unpredictable. They want the GMs to be rolling 20s just as often as they're rolling 1s, just as often as they're rolling 11s. So it caught me off guard because I was reading through it. They're like, oh, then the GM rolls a d20 for this. And I'm like, wait, the GM, basically, because the book isn't the best edited yet as well. They're working on editing it too. But you're like, oh, hey, I need to basically, like, they're talking about how the GMs resolve things, so I had to flip back further into the book. They're like, oh yeah, GMs roll d20s. Like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So, basically, all that to say, so Daggerheart is a really interesting, basically, it's a system I look for. Obviously, it's Critical Role. They're a juggernaut in the space. Anything they produce, basically, there is a wide market that's after WotC fumbled the ball with the OGL last January. A lot of new players that come onto the market and are rushing to try to fill that gap. You have Pathfinder just went to Pathfinder Remastered. They're releasing Starfinder to be compatible with it to try to fill that space. You have the Kobold, Tales of the Valiant, I think is basically their system. You have MCDM. I can never get the name of that one straight. Which is basically another system that basically is like, oh, hey, we're going to be releasing a new MCDM. Correct. Awesome. Thank you, Wolfmom. So basically, they're another one that have jumped into that space. This is another one. Basically, Daggerheart is Critical Role jumping into that kind of space with their own version of it. And Wolfmom actually pointed this out to me earlier. Modifius is entering into the high fantasy space as well with Heroes of Might and Magic is their high fantasy IP that they're picking to do a 2d20 high fantasy game with. So a lot of the systems that you saw in Dune and Fallout and Star Trek, they're going to be applying to a basically Achtung Cthulhu. They're going to be applying to a Conan, basically to a high fantasy space with Heroes of Might and Magic. So, and Heroes of Might and Magic is interesting because, yes, the video game series Heroes of Might and Magic, based off of the Might and Magic series. Basically, it's kind of interesting they're doing, because Wolfmom pointed out to me, and I looked at it, and I did some research, and they're doing it based on Heroes of Might and Magic 3, which is part of the old Might and Magic series, which Might and Magic, for those who don't know, is ostensibly fantasy, but once you scratch at the surface a little bit, aliens start showing up and the system gets weird. Yeah, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is the one that everybody knows about. It's the one, basically, it's probably the best one. It's probably the most well-known one. It's the one everyone has nostalgia for. So it makes sense that they're picking that one to be the basis. It'll be interesting to see if they just treat it as high fantasy. The site says high fantasy. All the graphics and things like that are very definitely high fantasy. Calling it Heroes of Might and Magic implies they're going for high fantasy. So it'll be interesting to see how they apply all of that stuff to the 2D20 system. So, again, you're going to have a lot of choices for high fantasy. And some of them will survive and get cool expansions and can keep going and get cool stuff. And some of them will, I mean, the books will be out there. They'll be published. They'll exist. You can always run them. But they may or may not get continuing support. And D&D, of course, will continue to exist for as long as tabletop RPGs exist. And as long as there are tabletop RPGs, LoreLink is going, basically, I won't say for as long as there'll be tabletop RPGs, but the tabletop RPG space is where LoreLink is there to help with. Basically, no matter what type of tabletop RPGs you end up playing, whether they're high fantasy ones, sci-fi ones, basically sci-fi, fantasy, horror, detectives, all of that space. LoreLink is there to help you build out your games, basically build them out in a method that best suits the type of game you're playing, as well as your methodology. Your methodology is, and so you can build it out for whatever is good. If you're curious about what other types of games that we have run LoreLink with, we have the, obviously on that website, which has just popped up right there, we have an examples page. It's lorelink.com/systems. There it is. Basically, it lists all of the fun systems that we have used in them. Some of them we've run actual plays in. Some of them we've just talked about, like we did here with Daggerheart. We've just kind of talked about how thoughts about them. All of them are on there, as well as links to basically our YouTube channel, which is the YouTube channel is where this video is currently streaming in multiple parts. And you can find archives of our past thing. The system page will link you directly to some of those videos if you want tutorials and things like that. Some of those are on there as well. So all of those are basically available on there for you to look at. And if you enjoy those videos, go ahead and click like the videos, subscribe to the channel, and you can find out when more videos come out there. When the streaming is working, we are streaming here. As you saw, basically, earlier, we are... Let me see if I can't pull that up. 1 second. Rotationally transparent. There it is. I don't know where that went, but you know. There it is. There's that streaming schedule. So basically you can see like today, yesterday Mike was doing Crest of the Frozen Flame. Tuesday, which is today, I'm doing Daggerheart. Next week we'll be doing War Tales. Basically because the reason why we're going to be playing video games. We have one Mark PC isn't randomly crashing, yes. We'll be playing War Tales, and basically the reason why we're kind of doing video games is because we like to play TTRPG type as video games on the channel occasionally. And also, that is the week of Origins, where we will be venturing out of the comfort of our, I would gesture and basically include my house, but you can't see my gesturing. So I'll be so you actually can see me in person and see me at all, basically, and you don't have to worry about weird internet glitches cutting you off. Unless you're a robot. You don't have to tell me if you're a robot, but basically, we'll figure it out when the internet dies. And you could visit us there. We'll have cool swags at the booth. You could check out a demo of LoreLink. You could come to us and say, hey, I'm curious about running this type of system or this kind of way. What do you think about that? We'd love to talk to you about those sorts of things. So we will be there at for Origins booth 713 on the right. Basically, as you're looking at the exhibit hall, it's on the right side towards the front. we will be there. We'll have basically, you'll see our smiling faces. And basically you can check out and probably get some cool swag. I can guarantee you we'll have some dice and maybe some other cool stuff as well. You'll have to show up to see, though. And additionally, we are also, basically, if you're wanting to see us in person, but you're not doing Origins, you're doing the other giant gaming convention, yes, we are going to be at Gen Con. We are hammering out the details of what our booth space will be like as we speak. But we are most likely going to be there and present in the Makers Market, which is in the connector between the Indianapolis Convention Center and the Lucas Oil Stadium. A little cool underground thing, much quieter. Yeah, that's good. We'll definitely have to save you some dice, 20, to make sure that you can basically get some of those. We have 2 colors, so we have 3 different types of dice. Collect them all. And all that to say, so basically we have got all sorts of exciting plans. Basically, and then the week after that, I am basically taking a break. And so Mike will be taking over my normal Tuesday slot, and he'll be looking at Lore Link and Pendragon. Pendragon is a lot of fun if you're not looking for high fantasy, but more historical fantasy. Legendary fantasy. It's not really historical. It's more basically more legend based fantasy is probably the best way to put it. Arthurian mythos, mythic fantasy after a fashion. Yeah, that works. And then the week after that is the week of 4th of July, and we're all going to take a breath and take a break. So if any of those things sound interesting to you, you can catch us all right here on this channel. The best way to find out if we're streaming or not is to give this channel a follow, and that will give you an alert if you tell it to basically that we have gone live and what we're streaming. And basically, if you really like what we're doing here, you could subscribe to our channel. And if you're like, hey, subscribing costs money. If you have a Twitch Prime, basically because you happen to be Amazon Prime, because you have to get stuff through Amazon, you can give us a Twitch Prime subscription through the gaming, through gaming.amazon.com, and you can throw that over our way, and we always appreciate essentially the tips. The Crown Royal bag is a tradition. Basically, even for people who don't drink, they just end up with Crown Royal bags with dice bags in them. Basically, they're just really nice, the appropriate size. Yes, they're just the appropriate size for a dice bag, and they're nice bags. So a lot of people just end up with them that way. It's kind of a tradition. So that's a lot of words and a lot of talking. So basically, thank you all for watching and streaming and talking and chatting and discussing dice and putting up with weird technical glitches on our end. And we will catch you all next week for War Tales. Oh, I also did forget, we do have social media. I knew there was something I was forgetting. Social media, of course. Basically, if you want to find out what we're doing, you don't want us to have to worry about our streams being brought down by weird technical internet glitches, you can catch us on the social medias. Those are just there. You lower bandwidth, Blue Sky, Facebook, and Instagram. All have updates on what we're doing, where we'll be, and lastly, we have a newsletter, and that will give you a kind of condensed summary of all the things we've been talking about and all the things we're doing. So, catch you all later. Farewell.